Hi everyone, good afternoon. It is Friday, April 10th, 2020, and this is Farmer Boy. Hope everyone's okay today. Hope everyone's having a good day. I'm here in Orlando. You're off where you are. Hopefully staying sheltered in place, washing your hands, wearing your masks. That's the good thing that needs to be happening right now for all of us. This has been such a great experience. I'm just going to tip the scale here a little bit, or tip the news. This will be the final Farmer Boy reading because we have reached the final 2 chapters of the book, and so that's what we'll get read today. And then Allison will take over with Little House on the Prairie either tomorrow or Monday, and I know she'll let you know what she's planning to do. She and I haven't spoken today, so I don't know what her plan is for carrying on, or who, in fact, she may have enlisted to read Little House on the Prairie. Maybe it's her, maybe it's going to be another of our Little House friends. I just don't know. Something else that I want to put out there today. I got a cameo request last night from Joan for her friend Bessie. Joan and Bessie have been friends for 40 years. They grew up with Little House, watching it and perhaps and reading the books too. And I learned that that Farmer Boy is Bessie's favorite one of her favorite Little House books, maybe her favorite. And she has been online watching the readings going on. Well, today is Bessie's birthday, and I sent her a birthday wish this morning. And for all the Little House fans, from one Little House fan to another, I hope you'll all take a moment on your screen and wish Bessie a happy birthday. She didn't tell me what birthday it is for her, but if they've been friends for 40 years, and you know, she's got to be 50s something, but if you can type quickly, wish Bessie a happy birthday. And Bessie, again, happy birthday. Hope you're having a great day, and I hope you're here to enjoy the final reading of Farmer Boy. The first of the last 2 chapters is Mr. Thompson's Pocketbook. And so we begin. Father had so much hay that year that the stock could not eat it all. So he decided to sell some of it in town. He went to the woods and brought back a straight, smooth ash log. He hewed the bark from it, and then with a wooden maul, he beat the log, turning it and pounding it until he softened the layer of wood that had grown last summer and loosened the thin layer of wood underneath it, which had grown the summer before. Then with his knife, he cut long gashes from end to end, about 1.5 inches apart, and he peeled off that thin, tough layer of wood strips about 1.5 inches wide. Those were ash withes. And ash withes, or in this case, ash withes, but withes are natural material that's has been used for years to bind things together, to tie things. So this was telling Almanzo something. When Almanzo saw the ash withes piled on the big barn floor, he guessed that Father was going to bale hay. And he sat and he asked, "Be you going to need help?" Well, Father's eyes twinkled. "Yes, son," he said. "You can stay home from school. You won't learn hay baling any younger." Early the next morning, Mr. Weed, the hay baler, came with his press, and Almanzo helped set it up on the big barn floor. It was a stout wooden box, as long and wide as a bale of hay, but 10 feet high. Its cover could be fastened on tightly, and its bottom was loose. 2 iron levers were hinged to the loose bottom, and the levers ran on little wheels on iron tracks going out to each end of the box. The tracks were like small railroad tracks, and the press was called a railroad press. It was a new, fine machine for baling hay. In the barnyard, Father and Mr. Webb set up a capstan with a long sweep on it, A rope from the capstan went through a ring under the hay press and was tied to another rope that went to the wheels at the ends of the levers. When everything was ready, Almanzo hitched Bess to the sweep. Father pitched hay into the box, and Mr. Weed stood in the box and trampled it down till the box would hold no more. Then he fastened the cover on the box, and Father called, "All right, Almanzo." Almanzo slapped Bess with the lines and shouted, "Get up, Bess." Bess began to walk around the capstan, and the capstan began to wind up the rope. The rope pulled the ends of the levers toward the press, and the inner ends of the levers pushed its loose bottom upward. The bottom slowly rose, squeezing the hay. The rope creaked and the box groaned till the hay was pressed so tight it couldn't be pressed tighter. Then Father shouted, "Whoa!" And Almanzo, "Whoa, Bess!" Father climbed up the hay press and ran ash-wides through the narrow cracks in the box. He pulled them tight around the bale of hay and knotted them firmly. Mr. Weed unfastened the cover, and up popped a bale of hay. Bulging between tight ash withes, it weighed 250 pounds, but Father lifted it easily. I want to stop here. When I was a kid, 12, 13, 14 years old, at our summer place in the ranch, we did hay baling on our place. We had a neighbor who planted barley and oats and wheat, and he would harvest it in the sort of in midsummer, and then he would bring his baler, small baling machine, and we would wind through the field with the windrows of whatever the grain was, whatever the grass was, and the baler would scoop it up and compress it, wire it, and it would spit out the other end. I just remember the hay bales, the 2-wire bales that I was involved in making weighed about, weighed between 90 and 100 pounds, something like that. And these were cumbersome things to work with. When I read that in their barn, the Wilders are baling 250-pound bales of hay, that is a huge bale. These bales that I was making were probably, they were probably 5 feet long. They were probably 18 inches wide and, maybe another 15 to 18 inches tall. So this was a bulky load of hay, tightly compressed in this machine. And it's a mechanical process. It's pretty amazing to watch. And I would follow along behind this and stack the hay, where it would be bucked up with a buck rake, and then I would end up stacking the piles of baled hay. Good sweat-inducing work for a young man. Really sweat-inducing work for a full-grown man, and 250-pound bales is quite a thing to have made. It just amazes me that they were making that big a bale. When Father and Mr. Weed reset the press, Almanzo unwound the rope from the capstan, and they began again to make another bale of hay. All day they worked, and that night Father said they had baled enough. Almanzo sat at the supper table, wishing he did not have to go back to school. He thought about figuring, and he was thinking so hard that words came out of his mouth before he knew it. 30 bales to a load at $2 a bale, he said. That's $60 a load. And then he stopped, scared. He knew better than to speak at the table when he wasn't spoken to. "Mercy on us, listen to the boy," Mother said. "Well, well, son," said Father, "I see you've been studying to some purpose." He drank the tea out of his saucer, set it down, and looked again at Almanzo. "Learning is best put into practice. What say you ride to town with me tomorrow and sell that load of hay?" "Oh, yes, yes, please, Father," Almanzo almost shouted. He did not have to go to school the next morning. He climbed high on the top of the load of hay and lay there on his stomach and kicked up his heels. Father's hat was down below him, and below were the plump backs of the horses. He was as high up as if he were in a tree. The load swayed a little, and the wagon creaked, and the horses' feet made dull sounds on the hard snow. The air was clear and cold, the sky was very blue, and all the cloudy fields were sparkling. All the snowy fields were sparkling. Just beyond the bridge over Trout River, Almanzo saw a small black thing lying beside the road. When the wagon passed, he leaned over the edge of the hay and saw that it was a pocketbook. He yelled, and Father stopped the horses and let him climb down and pick it up. It was a fat black wallet. Almanzo shinnied up the bales of hay, and the horses went on. He looked at the pocketbook. He opened it, and it was full of banknotes. There was nothing to show who owned them. He handed it down to Father, and Father gave him the reins. The team seemed far below, with the lines slanting down to the hames, and Almanzo felt very small, but he liked to drive. He held the lines carefully, and the horses went steadily along. Father was looking at the pocketbook and at the money. Now, there's $1,500 here, Father said. Now, who does it belong to? And he's a man who's afraid of banks, or he wouldn't carry so much money around. You can see by the creases in the bills he's carried them for some time. They're big bills and folded together, so likely he got them all at once. Now, who's suspicious and stingy and sold something valuable lately? Almanzo didn't know, but Father didn't expect him to answer. The horses went around a curve in the road as well as if Father had been driving them. "Thompson!" Father exclaimed. "He sold some land last fall. He's afraid of banks, and he's suspicious, and so stingy he'd skin a flea for its hide and tallow. Thompson's the man." He put the pocketbook in his pocket and took the lines from Almanzo. "Well, we'll see if we can find him in town," he said. Father drove first to the livery sale and feed stable. The liveryman came out, and sure enough, Father let Almanzo sell the hay. He stood back and did not say anything while Almanzo showed the liveryman that the hay was good timothy and clover, clean and bright, and every bale solid and full weight. "How much you want for it?" the liveryman asked. $2.25 a bale, Almanzo said. "I won't pay that price," said the liveryman. "Isn't worth it." "Well, what would you call a fair price?" Almanzo asked him. "Not a penny over $2, the liveryman said. "All right. I'll take $2, said Almanzo quickly. The liveryman looked at Father, and then he pushed back his hat and he asked Almanzo why he priced the hay at $2.25 in the first place. "Are you taking it at $2? Almanzo asked. The liveryman said he was. "Well," Almanzo said, "I asked $2.25 because if I asked $2, you wouldn't have paid but $1.75. The liveryman laughed and said to Father, "That's a smart boy of yours." "Time will show," Father said. "Many a good beginning makes a bad ending. It remains to be seen how he turns out in the long run." Father did not take the money for the hay. He let Almanzo take it and count it to make sure it was $60. Then they went to Mr. Case's store. The store was always crowded, but Father always did his trading there because Mr. Case sold his goods cheaper than other merchants. Mr. Case said, "I'd rather have a nimble sixpence than a slow shilling." That's a cool phrase. I'd rather have a nimble sixpence than a slow shilling. Almanzo stood in the crowd with Father, waiting while Mr. Case served first comers. Mr. Case was polite and friendly to everybody alike. He had to be because they were all customers. Father was polite to everybody too, but he was not as friendly to some as he was to others. After a while, Father gave Almanzo the pocketbook and told him to look for Mr. Thompson. Father must stay in the store and wait his turn. He could not lose time if they were to get home by chore time. No other boys were on the street. They were all in school. Almanzo liked to be walking down the street carrying all that money, and he thought how glad Mr. Thompson would be to see it again. He looked in the stores and the barber shop and the bank. Then he saw Mr. Thompson's team standing on a side street in front of Mr. Paddock's wagon shop. He opened the door of the long, low building and went in. Mr. Paddock and Mr. Thompson were standing by the round-bellied stove looking at a piece of hickory and talking about it. Almanzo waited because he could not interrupt them. It was warm in the building and there was a good smell of shavings and leather and paint. Beyond the stove, 2 workmen were making a wagon and another was painting thin red lines on the red spokes of a new buggy. The buggy glistened proudly in black paint. Long curls of shavings lay in heaps, and the whole place was as pleasant as a barn on a rainy day. The workmen whistled while they measured and marked and sawed and planed the clean-smelling wood. Mr. Thompson was arguing about the price of a new wagon. Almanzo decided that Mr. Paddock did not like Mr. Thompson, but he was trying to sell the wagon. He figured the cost with his big carpenter's pencil and soothingly tried to persuade Mr. Thompson. You see, I can't cut the price any further and pay my men, he said. I'm doing the best I can for you. I guarantee we'll make a wagon to please you, or you don't have to take it. Well, maybe I'll come back to you if I can't do better elsewhere, Mr. Thompson said suspiciously. Well, I'm glad to serve you any time, said Mr. Paddock. And then he saw Almanzo, and he asked how the pig was getting along. Almanzo liked big, jolly Mr. Paddock. He always asked about Lucy. Hey, she'll weigh about 150 now, Almanzo told him, and he turned to Mr. Thompson and asked, Did you lose your pocketbook? Mr. Thompson jumped. He clapped a hand to his pocket and fairly shouted, Yes, I have. $1,500 in it, too. What about it? What do you know about it? Is this it? Almanzo asked. Yes, that's it, Mr. Thompson said, snatching the pocketbook. He opened it and hurriedly counted the money. He counted all the bills over twice, and he looked exactly like a man skinning a flea for its hide and its tallow. Then he breathed a long sigh of relief, and he said, Well, this darn boy didn't steal any of it. Almanzo's face was hot as fire. He wanted to hit Mr. Thompson. Mr. Thompson thrust his skinny hand into his pants pocket and hunted around, and he took out something. Here, he said, putting it into Almanzo's hands. It was a nickel. Almanzo was so angry he couldn't see. He hated Mr. Thompson. He wanted to hurt him. Mr. Thompson called him a darn boy, and as good as called him a thief. Almanzo didn't want his old nickel. Suddenly, he thought what to say. Here, he said, handing the nickel back. Keep your nickel. I can't change it. Mr. Thompson's tight, mean face turned red. One of the workmen laughed a short, jeering laugh, but Mr. Paddock stepped up to Mr. Thompson, angry. Don't you call this boy a thief, Thompson? He's not a beggar either. That's how you treat him. That's how you treat him, is it? When he brings you back your $1,500, call him a thief and hand him a nickel, will you? Mr. Thompson stepped back, but Mr. Paddock stepped right after him. Mr. Paddock shook his fist under Mr. Thompson's nose. You measly skinflint, Mr. Paddock said. If I know it, you won't. Not in my place. A good, honest, decent little chap, and you, for a cent, no. You hand him 100 of that money and do it quick. No, you hand him 200 of that. $200, I say, or take the consequences. Mr. Thompson tried to say something, and so did Almanzo, but Mr. Paddock's fists clenched and the muscles of his arms bulged. 200! He shouted, hand it over quick, or I'll see you do. Here's the picture of Mr. Paddock leaning in on the old skinflint Thompson. I love the Garth Williams illustrations. Thompson looks like sort of a Weasley guy, sort of cowering there. Mr. Thompson shrank down small, watching Mr. Paddock, and he licked his thumb and hurriedly counted off some bills. He held them out to Almanzo. And Almanzo said, Mr. Paddock, now you get out of here. If you know what's healthy, you get out. Mr. Paddock said, and before Almanzo could blink, he was standing there with the bills in his hand, and Mr. Thompson slammed the door behind himself. Almanzo was so excited, he stammered. He said he didn't think Father would like it. Almanzo felt sort of queer about taking that money, and yet he did want to keep it. Mr. Paddock said he would talk to Father. He rolled down his shirt sleeves and put on his coat and asked, "Where is he?" Well, Almanzo almost ran to keep up with Mr. Paddock's long strides, and the bills were clutched tight in his hand. Father was putting packages into the wagon, and Mr. Paddock told him what had happened. "For a cent, I'd have smashed his sneering face," Mr. Paddock said. "But it struck me that giving up cash is what hurts him most, and I figure the boy's entitled to it." Well, I don't know as anybody's entitled to anything for common honesty, Father objected, though I must say I appreciate the spirit you showed, Paddock. I don't say he deserved more than decent gratitude for giving Thompson his own money, Mr. Paddock said, but it's just too much to ask him to stand and take insults on top of that. I say Almanzo's entitled to that $200. Well, there's something in what you say, said Father. Finally, he decided, all right, son, you can keep that money. Almanzo smoothed out the bills and looked at them. $200. That was as much as the horse buyer paid for one of Father's 4-year-olds. "And I'm much obliged to you, Paddock, standing up for the boy the way you did," Father said. "Well, I can afford to lose a customer now and then in a good cause," said Mr. Paddock. He asked Almanzo, what are you going to do with all that money?" Almanzo looked at Father. "Could I put it in the bank?" he asked. "That's the place to put money," said Father. Well, $200. I was twice your age before I had that much." "So was I. Yep, and older than that," Mr. Paddock said. Father and Almanzo went to the bank. Almanzo could just look over the ledge at the cashier sitting on his high stool with a pen behind his ear. The cashier craned to look down at Almanzo when he asked Father, "Hadn't I better put this down to your account, sir?" "Nope," Father said. "It's the boy's money. Let him handle it himself. He won't learn any younger." "Yes, sir," the cashier said. Almanzo had to write his name twice. Then the cashier carefully counted the bills and wrote Almanzo's name in a little book. He wrote the figures $200 in the book, and he gave the book to Almanzo. Almanzo went out of the bank with Father and asked him, "How do I get the money out again?" "You ask for it, and they'll give it to you. But remember this, son, as long as that money's in the bank, it's working for you. Every dollar in the bank is making you 4 cents a year. That's a sight easier than you can earn money any other way. Anytime you want to spend a nickel, you stop and you think, how much work does it take to earn $1? "Yes, Father," Almanzo said. He was thinking that he had more than enough money to buy a little colt. He could break a little colt of his own. He could teach it everything. Father would never let him break one of his colts, but this was not the end of that exciting day. And now the final chapter of Farmer Boy, called Farmer Boy. Mr. Paddock met Almanzo and Father outside the bank. He told Father that he had something in mind. "I've been meaning to speak about it for some little time," he said, about this boy of yours. Almanzo was surprised. You ever thinking of making him a wheelwright? You ever think of making a wheelwright out of him?" Mr. Paddock asked. "Well, no," Father answered slowly. I can't say I ever did." "Well, think it over now," said Mr. Paddock. "It's a growing business, Wilder. The country's growing, population's getting bigger all the time, and folks have got to have wagons and buggies. They've got to travel back and forth. The railroads don't hurt us. We're getting more customers all the time. It's a good opening for a smart young fella." "Yeah," Father said. "I've got no sons of my own, and you got 2, said Mr. Paddock. "You have to think about starting Almanzo out in life before long. Apprentice him to me, and I'll treat the boy right. If he turns out the way I expect, no reason he shouldn't have the business in time." He'd be a rich man and maybe 100 workmen under him. It's worth thinking about. Yes, Father said. It's worth thinking about. I appreciate what you've said, Paddock. Father did not talk on the way home. Almanzo sat beside him on the wagon seat and did not say anything either. So much had happened that he thought about it all together, and it was all mixed up. He thought of the cashier's inky fingers and of Mr. Thompson's thin mouth screwed down at the corners, and of Mr. Paddock's fists, and the busy, warm, cheerful wagon shop. He thought, if he was Mr. Paddock's apprentice, he wouldn't have to go to school. He had often envied Mr. Paddock's workmen. Their work was fascinating. The thin, long shavings curled away from the keen edges of the planes. They stroked the smooth wood with their fingers. Almanzo liked to do that too. He would like to spread on paint with a wide paintbrush, and he would like to make fine, straight lines with a tiny pointed brush. When the buggy was done, all shining in its new paint, or when a wagon was finished, every piece good sound hickory or oak, with the wheels painted red and the box painted green and a little picture painted on the tailboard, the workmen were proud. They made wagons as sturdy as Father's bobsleds and far more beautiful. Then Almanzo felt the small, stiff bank book in his pocket, and he thought about a colt. He wanted a colt with slender legs and large, gentle, wondering eyes, like starlight's. He wanted to teach the little colt everything, as he had taught Star and Bright. So Father and Almanzo rode all the way home, not saying anything. The air was still cold, and all the trees were still black lines drawn on the snow in the sky. It was chore time when they got home. Almanzo helped to do the chores, but he wasted some time looking at Starlight. He stroked the soft, velvety nose, and he ran his hand along the firm curve of Starlight's little neck under the mane. Starlight nibbled with soft lips along his sleeve. "Son, where you be?" Father called, and Almanzo ran guiltily to his milking. At supper time, he sat steadily eating while Mother talked about what had happened. She said that in her life, she said you could have knocked her over with a feather. She didn't know why it was so hard to get it out of Father. Father answered her questions, but like Almanzo, he was busy eating. And at last, Mother asked him, "James, what's on your mind?" And then Father told her that Mr. Paddock wanted to take Almanzo as an apprentice. Mother's brown eyes snapped, and her cheeks turned as red as her red wool dress. She laid down her knife and fork. "I've never heard of such a thing," she said. "Well, the sooner Mr. Paddock gets that out of his head, the better. I hope you gave him a piece of your mind. Why on earth, I'd like to know, should Almanzo live in town at the beck and call of every Tom, Dick, and Harry?" "Paddock makes good money," said Father. "I guess if truth were told, he banks more money every year than I do. He looks on it as a good opening for the boy." "Well," Mother snapped. She was all ruffled like an angry hen. "A pretty pass the world's coming to if any man thinks it's a step up in the world to leave a good farm and go to town. How does Mr. Paddock make his money if it isn't catering to us?" "I guess if he didn't make wagons to suit farmers, he wouldn't last long." "Well, that's true enough," said Father. "But no, there's no but about it," Mother said. "Oh, it's bad enough to see Royal come down to being nothing but a storekeeper. Maybe he'll make money, but he'll never be the man you are, truckling to other people for his living and all his days. He'll never be able to call his soul his own." Well, for a minute, Almanzo wondered if Mother was going to cry. There, Father said sadly. "Now, don't take it too much to heart. Maybe it's all for the best somehow." "I won't have Almanzo going the same way," Mother cried. "I won't have it. Do you hear me?" "I feel the same way you do," said Father. "But the boy has to decide. We can keep him here on the farm by law till he's 21, but it won't do any good if he's wanting to go. No. If Almanzo feels the way Royal does, we better apprentice him to Paddock while he's young enough." Almanzo went on eating. He was listening, But he was tasting the good taste of roast pork and applesauce in every corner of his mouth. He took a long, cold drink of milk, and then he sighed and tucked his napkin farther in, and he reached for his pumpkin pie. Here he is. This boy is surrounded by food all the time. I've never seen so much food around one person. He cut off the quivering point of the golden brown pumpkin, dark with spices and sugar. It melted on his tongue, and all his mouth and nose were spicy. He's too young to know his own mind, Mother objected. Almanzo took another big mouthful of pie. He could not speak till he was spoken to, but he thought to himself that if he was old enough to know he'd rather be like Father than like anybody else. He did not want to be like Mr. Paddock even. Mr. Paddock had to please a mean man like Mr. Thompson or lose the sale of a wagon. Father was free and independent. If he went out of his way to please anybody, it was because he wanted to please them. Suddenly he realized that Father had spoken to him. He swallowed and almost choked on pie. Yes, Father, he said. Father was looking solemn. Son, he said, you heard what Paddock said about you being apprenticed to him? Yes, Father. What do you say about it? Almanzo didn't exactly know what to say. He hadn't supposed he could say anything. He would have to do whatever Father said. Well, son, you think about it, said Father. I want you should make up your own mind. With Paddock, you'd have an easy life in some ways. You wouldn't be out in all kinds of weather. Cold winter nights, you could lie snug in bed and not worry about young stock freezing. Rain or shine, wind or snow, you'd be under shelter. You'd be shut up inside walls. Likely you'd always have plenty to eat and wear and money in the bank. James, Mother said, what's the truth? We must be fair about it, Father answered, but there's the other side too, Almanzo. You'd have to depend on other folks, son, in town. Everything you got, you'd get from other folks. A farmer depends on himself and the land and the weather. If you're a farmer, you raise what you eat. You raise what you wear. And you keep warm with wood out of your own timber. You work hard, but you work as you please, and no man can tell you to come or go. She actually wrote, tell you to go or come. You'll be free and independent, son, on a farm. Almanzo squirmed. Father was looking at him too hard. And so was Mother. Almanzo did not want to live inside walls and please people he didn't like and never have horses and cows and fields. He wanted to be just like Father, but he didn't want to say so. Now, you take your time, son. You think it over, Father said. You make up your mind what you want. Father, Almanzo exclaimed. Yes, son. Can I tell you what I really want? Yes, son, Father encouraged him. I want a colt, Almanzo said. I could buy a colt all my own with some of that $200, and would you let me break him? Father's beard slowly widened with a smile. He put down his napkin and leaned back in his chair and looked at Mother. And then he turned to Almanzo and said, son, you leave that money in the bank. Almanzo felt everything sinking down inside him. And then suddenly, the whole world was a great, shining, expanding glow of warm light, for Father went on. If it's a colt you want, I'll give you starlight. Father, Almanzo gasped, for my very own? Yes, son. You can break him and drive him, and when he's 4 years old, you can sell him or keep him just as you want him. We'll take him out on a rope first thing tomorrow morning, and you can begin to gentle him. And that's the end of Farmer Boy. I just love that moment when Laura pays off the thing that Almanzo wanted more than anything else. She established it right up front, what was the most important thing in his life. And at the end of the book, after everything he did and all of his effort and all of his carefulness and all of his a few mistakes, but his patience and his passion was rewarded by his father. That says good things about Almanzo, and it says wonderful things about Almanzo's father. That all along his father saw what his son wanted, and all along he was just teaching him how to get there on his own. And so by the time that James was ready to say, you can have this colt, you can have Starlight, he knew his son was ready for it. And Almanzo now is off on a whole new adventure, and we won't catch up to him again until, what, by the shores of Silver Lake? That's when we catch, we're Little Town on the Prairie? I guess, let's see. Which is it? When do we see him first? By the shores of Silver Lake or Little Town on the Prairie? I know you know. This has been so much fun doing this. I've said it 80 times. I love this book. I love the material. I love that I had the chance to be associated with this in my life. It's been one of the great gifts of my life to be able to be a part of this and to have the chance to sit here and read this to you, a group of people who love this so much. It's just incredibly moving to me and so rewarding, and thank you for it. And I hope that Allison will invite me back. This is Allison's adventure on her Facebook Live channel. And Allison, you've done a great job starting this off. And I know the next books are going to be fun, but keep me in mind. I'm going to log off your Facebook page now, by the way, because I've been logged into it for the last 2 weeks. But I'm going to log off of it now so that you can have it back and I can follow my own Facebook page on my phone. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend. I'll see you soon. It's going to be a few weeks, certainly. But have fun. Have a great weekend. Wash your hands. Wear your masks. Stay sheltered. The country's moving in the right direction, but we're not there yet. So it needs all of us to really be focused. And not just us in our country, because I know that we have people from all over the world who listen to this. Everyone globally is hopefully doing their part to make this to make our world healthy again. It's a worthy challenge for us all to take on. Be well. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.